So I'm very excited today to welcome to the Global Business Podcast Show Anne Boudreau. Anne, welcome to the show.
Hello, Mark. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
We were just having a great chat offline before we started today, and the sad news that came out of that is you experienced a stolen laptop. That must have been a terrible experience.
It was terribly dramatic because I had thousands and thousands of pages written, and thank goodness for iCloud, so much of it was saved, but the stuff that I had not saved was gone. But I've moved on. Resilient, so you have to move on at some point.
Are you able to let something like that go easily? Like, is it just something that you can go, okay, it happened, I'll move on now, or does it actually bear with you a little bit?
Not something of that magnitude, simply because, and here's the caveat that's interesting about it, is I was picking him up. He had gone to Quebec for a week. And as we were getting out to go to a restaurant to eat, I thought, should I bring my laptop and notes or should I not? And then I decided, I'm just going to leave it here. You know, it's dark. And so as I was locking, I was saying, oh, I hope no one's around because my life is in here. And sure enough, we come back and my windows, bashed in, and that whole bag with all my stuff was gone. So I suffered gravely, but I was able to transcend it and realize that there are so many worse. Perspective is a beautiful sound.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say. It's just a bomb for so many things. And, the moment you let yourself unravel is the moment that you lose perspective. So it's very important to gain perspective, even when you lose something you love so much and treasure.
Do you think that when you sent out that energy to be concerned that it may be stolen, and that was a signal that was actually being sent out to the universe, do you believe that might have been the case?
I do believe that.
Yeah.
I do believe that. I think just the words that I used as I was going into that restaurant and my hesitation, I should have gone with my instinct and my gut, which is something I talk about a lot, is you've got to listen to your intuition because it never steers you astray.
Isn't it interesting? There's all these little reminders that come along on our journey to put us back centered on those things that we all believe in, and we're out there, talking to everybody every day about those things. But sometimes things happen in our own neighborhood, our own inner circle, that just reminds us to get back on track. I find that quite fascinating about how the universe reminds us from time to time.
It does. It has a very, very, very big way of intruding on your best of plans.
Now, whereabouts in the world are you talking to us from today? Because I think you're in one of my favorite places in the United States. Let's find out.
I don't know. Atlanta?
Yeah, I've had some great times in Atlanta. I really love the place, although you were saying to me that it was hot and humid there today.
Yes, it's been extremely hot, and it's been muggy, and a lot of that is due to the ancillary weather and the hurricanes that are taking place. But it's a nice city. I never thought I'd remain here for so long because I've lived all over the world. And I'm now anxious to move somewhere. I just haven't decided where. But if something doesn't change politically soon, I'll be moving to Canada or France or Italy, somewhere really beautiful and far, far away.
It sounds to me like, when I'm talking to lots of people on my show who are US based, that there's going to be a transmigration out of the country soon. It seems as everybody's heading north.
I think so, for good reason.
Yeah, amazing. So other than Atlanta, you weren't born there, I read. So whereabouts were you born?
I was born in Santiago, Chile, and loved it there. We lived there until I was about 9, and then we moved to various places, ended up in Europe, where we lived in Germany for about 10 years, and then we moved to Brussels, Belgium, which I saw you lived in as well. And that's where our last residence was, in Brussels, and we loved it there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's some of the best food in the world.
Yeah.
And just a marvelous place to live. It's beautiful, beautiful country. And you have 2.5 hours to Paris and the Netherlands. And I mean, it's just so beautifully located to get to access to anywhere.
And did you become a fan of the pommes frites and mayonnaise?
No, I mean, everyone else around me was, but no, I'm not a big French fry person. I'm not a big potato person. I'm not sure why, but I did love the Godiva chocolate.
Yes.
And, all the things that they're known for. And of course, I loved just being able to go skiing for a weekend if I wanted to, and things like that. My dad was a wonderful traveler, and we went everywhere all the time. We never rested. So it's a great way to grow up.
It's an interesting concept, isn't it? The whole travel thing, and how it grows our perspective on the world, the respect we have for other cultures, our understanding of other cultures. Someone like yourself who's traveled a lot, it means a lot in terms of where you're at today in your life and having an understanding of the world.
Absolutely. It's a huge component, not only of who I am as a person, being very broad, open-minded, and accepting and tolerant, but also how I treat other people. Because I learned mainly from my close friends in Europe, they don't typically judge. Now, I'm not saying this for everybody, but they don't judge people by their appearance. And they judge people by their character, and they form relationships with people out of interest and curiosity. I'm not saying that is true for everyone, but I find in the U.S. it is so externally everybody's so externally focused on how they look and what they have and how much they've accomplished. And they're bred that way. I mean, they're not born, feeling like they looking externally, but they're taught to have external goals and expectations and be the best at this and that. And so the focus is not inward on character building and creating curiosity and interest and acceptance for all people. It's focused on what I accomplish, and if I don't accomplish it, I'm not as good as the other person. I'm a failure, and so we learn that from the time where we can walk and talk.
Now, you're a mother of 3 children. I'd be interested to know your upbringing in Santiago, Chile, compared to bringing up 3 daughters in the United States of America and other places around the world. What do you think, going back to your roots in Santiago, do you think it would be easier to raise your children there than it is in a world like in the United States?
Well, I have 2 boys and 1 girl, by the way.
Right. Okay.
Not 2 boys and 1 girl. I did have some reticence, I'll say, about raising my kids here, but I made a concerted, diligent, daily effort to teach my kids values that they could hold on to no matter what. I also taught my children never to describe people by their appearance, rather to describe them by their personality. Are they silly? Are they gregarious? Are they introspective? Are they creative? Are they a good singer? And interestingly enough, I've written about this before, but my son, when he was about in 5th or 6th grade, no, I guess it was 5th grade, somebody asked him in school, "Oh, you're friends with that black kid, right?" Mm-hmm. And my son said, "You mean Darius? He's not black, he's just tanner than I am." And that was one of my proudest moments, because I realized that what you teach your children travels with them throughout life. Yeah. And if you start from a very communicative, open, and teach these values of trust, honesty, integrity, living up to your word, they learn quickly. It's just like if you feed them broccoli versus donuts.
Exactly right.
Donuts. So it's daunting for a lot of young parents, but easily doable.
From a role model perspective, is that something you got from your own parents?
No. My parents did the best they could with me. My dad was a fabulous father. My mother was a fragile, very broken person. Her father was a very, very big executive, and she lived in India and was born in Shanghai, and they lived all over the world, but she had no parenting from her parents. So she left that life to marry my dad, who was an international globetrotter, so to speak, and also a little bit of a playboy. And so she suffered from severe nervous breakdowns, learning that he was cheating on her. And so they were socialites in their day. Their life was very different. They were very different parents. Their focus was also on their relationships, the social life, the parties. They did a lot of entertaining. My dad was very successful. And so they did some really high-level entertaining with presidents from other countries and things. And they tended to, we took a back seat. My brothers and I were raised by in-home housekeepers or maids. Mm-hmm. And their focus, of course, should have been on us, but it really wasn't. So we were kind of put on the side. We were a sidebar. And I mean, when I was a little girl, I was in my room left alone for hours, and I had this, I saw the bottle of baby aspirin sitting on top of the counter, and I was so bored and I was curious, and I knew they tasted really good to me. So I climbed up on top of the bureau, and I ended up swallowing the entire bottle of baby aspirin, left unattended.
Wow.
And when Elena, one of our live-in mates, came in to find me practically falling off the edge of this bureau, she screamed bloody murder, and my mother came home and rushed me to the hospital. So they were better as we got older.
Yeah.
When we became older and started in boarding school. I went to boarding school and then went to college. We had more of a friendship.
Yep.
And that's when our relationship really evolved into something stronger and something better.
Yeah.
So
really interesting. I find that fascinating because it's going to be a subject of a lot of things that we talk about today in terms of self-worth and self-belief in people. And having spent most of my life as an expat traveling around the world, you do see that a lot in families where parents are typically busy doing whatever, and children are being, I don't want to use the word neglected, but they're being pushed to the side, I guess, in a lot of cases. And I've always thought, and not being a father myself, I just say this from an observation perspective, that I always thought, well, I wonder what those kids grow up to be like. And the fascinating thing is, in your case, you've adopted that as a premise of making sure that your children have exactly what you didn't have, I guess, in terms of some of that, self-love and care. So we're going to get into that. But I've got to tell you something. There's a phenomenon going on around the world at the moment, and it's got to do with the number 22. Do you know about it?
No.
No? Okay. Well, you're going to be the first to hear it today on the show. When I was reading up about you, I thought, well, hang on, Anne actually left the corporate world after 22 years. I did as well. My guest yesterday did as well. My guest last week did as well. So everybody's quitting the corporate world after 22 years. So there we go.
Very interesting. There must be something in that rhythm of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you share with the audience today what you used to do in the corporate world? Because I'm sure that's an interesting journey as well.
Yes, and that's the reason I moved to Atlanta to begin with. I went to school at Northwestern University in Chicago, and then my brother was down in Atlanta for law school, and he invited me down one weekend, and I had dinner with this CEO, and he offered me a job on the spot, pretty much. And I was 21, very green, and I got into basically running a property management firm. I was the assistant manager, and I learned business really from the ground up. I learned every aspect of business because I was managing their business, and it was a small to medium-sized business growth complex. So that as business grew from small to a little larger, we could have, create additional space for them. So it was a fabulous training ground for me. And then I kept getting one better job after another. And I was a writing honors student in college, so my ability to write well, clearly, cohesively, with a focus and an intrigue has helped me all throughout my career. I've written, speeches for CEOs, for politicians, all sorts of things, because writing is a rarity, a rare skill, and it's becoming less and less of a skill that people take, especially with the, advent of social media. But that really helped me grow quickly, and communications has always been my strength. I've always been gifted with the ability to commune well with people. I'm a natural empath, and I can read people fairly quickly and fairly incisively. So that also helped me in business because I was able to deal with the range of characters that I'd come across. One position that I was director of corporate communications worldwide for an engineering and environmental firm. And I worked with some very high profile figures like Andrew Young, who's the former mayor of Atlanta, and many others. And I was in my mid 20s, and they were all, and I was the only woman who was at the top there. So it was very difficult for me. I encountered a lot of I guess if the Me Too movement had been Me Too back then, there was a lot of discrimination against me being young and being female. But I grew I stretched like a rubber band during those years. I learned from Andrew Young and a lot of the former Army Corps of Engineers chief commander, who also there, and he instilled values and purpose and mission and drive. And so I learned all these great business essentials through them while encountering a lot of challenges and personal challenges with how to deal with these men. So it was a real growth curve. And from there on, I honed my skills in marketing and communications. And that was my area of expertise all throughout that time in business. But my last position was marketing director of an architectural firm, and with offices all over the world. And I was there right before the economic plunge of 2008. And it was a very difficult time, and they had to let go of a lot of people, a lot of architects, but they held on to me because I was marketing, and they needed marketing more than ever. So I held on until about the end of 2011, but the politics became so heavy, and in all earnestness, I could no longer, I lost my patience with the politics. I guess that's the best way to do it. I'd spent my entire career manipulating and dealing with it and covering up for people. And I got to that point in my life, I cannot do this anymore. And more importantly, I'd felt this void inside of me since I was 21, 22, that was nagging at me all the time. I was doing all this stuff for business and making money and helping increase revenues and closing doors, but it never satiated me. I never felt fulfilled. And I knew that before I die, I want to do something impactful, something that will make a change, whether small or big. But being in business was not going to be the change that satisfied me. So I resigned and decided that my mission was, as it was way back when I was 6 years old, was to help people feel better about who they are. That was always my biggest strength in business. I always, talk to staff and help them solve issues. And so that's when I decided I'm writing my book, and it's going to be about self-worth. And I did exhaustive research to find other books that were like that, because that's what you do when you're starting a book. You have to do research. And I couldn't find anything that really covered it comprehensively. So there began my journey, which was nearly a 6-year journey to this book. Yeah, it was
fascinating.
Labor of love, for sure.
We're going to get into that in detail in a minute, but I just want to go back to a part of your corporate journey. A lot of the things that you were saying then resonated not only with me, I'm sure, but many of the listeners out there who are either in that corporate journey or they have been part of a corporate journey like that. Why do you think corporates get so, numbing when it comes to human emotions? Why is it such a game? Why is it such a political minefield? What are your thoughts around that? We are, after all people, so why do we have to act like that?
We don't, is the answer. But again, we've been trained to outwit and outsmart. And there's always this discussion about IQ versus EQ, and EQ being emotional intelligence or your emotional quotient. And most people, because they've been focused, again, externally, what am I going to do? How much money am I going to make? When am I going to rise to this level where I can manage all these people and feel, good about myself and feel powerful? They sublimated or ignored their emotional skills. So, the less you use something, the more it dies down. There's something called synaptic pruning in the brain that if you are not using a certain skill, you end up deleting it from your brain. And so I think many of these, and I do believe that the new generation is much more in tune to that. They are much more aware of you just see it with the community, LGBTQ community, and people coming out for the Black Lives Matter. They're much more in tune with humanity and civil rights and treating people with absolute respect and admiration. And so a lot of the executives, and my brother works for a huge company where he says they're just dinosaurs. They're just eating each other up all the time. And so that's where I hope that I'm going to somehow during this COVID time make an impression on these people, try to change them, because it's never too late to change your ways. And most of these executives are internally miserable.
Yeah.
They're not happy being negative and difficult and harsh. They're really not.
Yeah.
They're internally very unhappy.
Yeah, that's the sad thing I find about it. I had many CEOs that I worked for that had outwardly demonstrated their frustrations in life, their failing in relationships, their just sadness, their ill health as well. That's the first thing that seems to go, is their health and their general well-being, all those things that you can resonate with. I have a glimmer of hope that the young generation is coming through and is going to change a lot about business in that way, because of the very things that you're talking about. They're more connected to humanity. And one of the struggles I had when I was working in the corporate life was I was trying to be a catalyst of change, but it's like swimming against a tsunami. It was in those days, because there just weren't enough believers to say, hey, we got to turn these ships around, because they're just heading off the cliff, so to speak. But we'll get into that. With your book, was there already an inspiration to do that before you left the corporate world, or was there some other plans to get out of the corporate world?
No, I always had a book in my head. I've kept journals ever since I was 6 years old, where I analyzed relationships and people and just their interactions, their energy, and how it affected other people. So I always knew that I had a book in the back. And I started writing many books. After my father died in 2002, I was so grief-stricken that I started writing a book about grief and the journey of grief, and I grew tremendously during that process. So I did have some former clients that I worked with right when I resigned. A former colleague and business associate hired me to rebrand her company, and I spent almost a year doing that. So, and I've kept my fingers in marketing a little bit.
Yep.
And to some degree, it's a skill that helps people transition, even themselves, because they learn to view themselves by their characteristics, which is really an intrinsic part of understanding yourself and the business world. So, no, when I left, I knew that I was going to start writing a book. I just had no idea what a huge chunk I was biting off. In hindsight, and I said to myself along the way, if I had chosen one tiny microscopic section of how one views themselves, whether it's even self-doubt or self-trust or something, I would have had an easier time. Self-worth is so complex, the composite of years of experience, and it has to do with your brain and neuroplasticity, and there's so many different elements that I did a tremendous amount of research with people all over the world. It was really quite a process.
I'd love to talk about the process of writing the book. We're going to get into the book itself, but I wanted to talk about the process. I'm a firm believer that we need to get more people around the world writing their stories, because there's so many incredible stories. I believe everyone's got a book inside them, and the world needs to hear them, because we need to start reading again, and we need to start reading really heartfelt stories of humanity rather than all this fake news that's around us. So how was the journey of actually writing the book for you? Was it something that you really embraced right from the beginning, or did you find it difficult at different steps of the way?
It was a very challenging. I will honestly say it was very challenging for me, because I'm so used to having structure and being productive and being able to. An airplane.
Can you hear the airplane going over? Yes.
Yeah.
It's a search and rescue. They're looking for me.
They are. They'll never find me. But I was really used to years and years and years of being on a schedule and interacting with people constantly. And I used to entertain as well. So it wasn't just 8 to 7 or 8 to 6. It was 8 to 10:30 or 11 sometimes. And so that was a huge trend. Just that mental leap was a big leap of faith for me, because I was working by myself, and I have children and family and dogs and everything. But writing is a very lonely, singular process. You cannot write with other people talking. And I started to feel that I had almost a case of adult ADHD, which I'd never had in my life. I've always been so focused. But you start writing, and then you start questioning what you're writing, and then you research, and the issue with this topic is that there is so much to know about the human brain.
Yeah.
That I never felt, even though I had volumes written over years, I never felt that it was enough.
Yeah.
There's so much to know about a human being, and every human being is so distinctly different. So I had my share of challenges. I wrote articles, which were much easier for me. But at long last, I started feeling this flow. I interviewed some experts, one in particular who who shaped me and helped me put concrete scientific data into the book, and that solidified, or perhaps gave me the credibility I was looking for.
Yep.
And he was a research scientist, a business Harvard-educated professor, and he's done this study about the changes in brain chemistry when people are optimistic versus pessimistic.
Right.
And it's fascinating. So I interviewed him several times and used much of his research in my book. But that's really what got me going and realizing that people have to hear this.
Yeah.
They have to learn that they can change their thoughts and therefore change their behavior. They're not stuck.
Yeah.
So that's a huge stride for me.
Yeah, brilliant.
In capacity.
I'm really glad to hear you sharing about the journey of the book, because a lot of the time it gets forgotten. You know, the book gets out and we get into the marketing and publicity side of the book and all the rest of it. But I'd actually like to write a book one day where I actually interview people about writing a book, because in itself there is a journey, and it's different for everybody that goes through that. I've just finished my latest book. It took me 6.5 weeks. Bang, I did it because I'm on a boat. I've got no distractions. I'm able to focus. The story was in my head, funnily enough, and it was about grief. It was about my father's passing. So there you go, another similarity there. So yeah, and other people have spent years writing a book and taking years to get through it. So it's a fascinating journey, because I think you also learn a lot about yourself when you write a book, and you've just explained that as well yourself. You kind of got into this pattern of, okay, some areas of this is making me feel uncomfortable. Why is it making me feel uncomfortable? And you learn new skill sets through that as well, I believe. You really do. You become more competent in certain areas. So I think it's a great journey to write a book. Get out there and write a book, everybody. That's my message today. Write a book.
Well, you know, and a screenwriter who's a very good friend of mine from college, and he's told me during this process, he said, you've got to sit down every day, even if all you do is write a sentence. You've got to sit there until blood starts seeping through your
Wow.
I said, are you serious?
Wow.
It can be painful at times, and particularly something where you are exposing yourself the way I did in my book, because I was always a very buttoned up suit, you know, prim and proper person who was successful in everything I tackled. And when I wrote this book, and I had interviews prior to that, my friends who've known me most of my life, or all throughout college and thereafter, they almost fell out of their chairs because they thought I was the most confident, had the world by a pinky finger, traveled all over the world, I looked the part, whatever. And no one, not even some of my family members, knew that I had struggled with my own self-worth.
Wow.
So that part was a little difficult for me in terms of just putting it out. But I knew that if I didn't base it on my own journey, people could not relate to it. There's one thing for a psychiatrist to give advice, but it's a whole different thing when you have suffered through it and have learned how to grow through it, heal, and transcend it.
Yeah.
And be a survivor, so to speak.
That's beautiful. Vulnerability is a fantastic thing, isn't it? When we put ourselves in that position, and it opens so many doors too. And I'm sure you found that around your close friends who actually saw you in a different light, perhaps for the first time in the journey. And that in itself can change relationships. Now let's talk about the book, because you've got it proudly promoted behind you. Do you want to move just slightly to the left? A Human Mosaic, yeah, and Heal, Renew, and Developing Self-Worth. What inspired this particular book? Why was it that you wanted to write this, Anne?
And my publicist always tells me that if I'd chosen a different title instead of A Human Mosaic, I'd probably be selling millions and millions of copies. I'm still young in that industry, but a lot of people don't understand what I mean by a human mosaic. And the reason I chose that specific title is because, as you know, a mosaic is different shapes, different pieces coming together, which is what I equate to our energy is constantly changing and evolving and growing and, we're shrinking at times. And so as we grow and evolve and look deeper into who we really are, our true selves, we are moving towards becoming a fully formed mosaic, a fully formed human being. And people use the expression our best self or the best version of ourselves. I don't like to use those cliches very much because they lose their meaning. What I say about that is that you're striving to be comfortable within yourself and accept yourself. One of the quotes that I love, and I use it in my book, is Mark Twain's, "The worst discomfort is to be uncomfortable with who you are.
Yeah.
The worst loneliness is to be uncomfortable with who you are."
Yeah.
And it's true. And millions of people feel that way, especially now during COVID, where they don't have that face-to-face energetic interaction, or they can't hug and feel that touch, which is so important to our humanity. And so I think my book started with me and my journey and what I did to heal myself. And then I interviewed lots and lots of people who had suffered severe trauma and easily could have died. I mean, so many of them, addicts and people who suffered from deep, deep, long-lasting depression for circumstantial reasons. I mean, things that happened to them that were out of their control. And of course, scientists and transcendental meditation experts and the wide range of people that acupuncturists, so you name it, plastic surgeons. And I got so many different perspectives, but it all led down to one central point. And that point is that until you feel that you matter, that you are of value, that you are worthy, that you're lovable, you will be constantly searching for something outside of you. So, and I did that for a long time. The better boyfriend, better looking, bigger job, more money, nicer clothes. And it never, it may have made me happy for a couple minutes, but then, then you come back to who am I internally? Who in my core being am I? Because for years I've lived with all these facades.
Yeah.
So writing this book was, first, you need to find a path to healing, to releasing those wounds, those scars, which anyone can do. Things stay with you, but you can learn to get beyond them. And then practices for changing the way you think through neuroplasticity, creating thoughts, transposing negative thoughts into positive thoughts, which takes practice, and repetition, and then how to develop a positive self-identity, self-value, which is so central to and fundamental to the quality of the life we lead. It affects every aspect of our life, from energy, attitude, sexuality, sleep, health, immune system, everything we do. And most people don't realize how much of a factor how you feel about yourself plays into the quality of your life. It's absolutely, at the core, it is the most important aspect of your life.
So much to ask you around this. First of all, let's start off with the people that you did interview for the book. So I believe there was around 40 or so people that you interviewed. How did it make you feel listening to their particular stories?
That's a great question. 40 plus all the experts. The experts were another 25-ish or so. But the trauma, as I said in the beginning of our interview, I am almost too much of an empath. In that I really suffer. When someone is bleeding in their heart, I'm not talking about external bleeding, and aching and so scarred by something that they don't even see themselves in the mirror, I feel that pain and I want to change it for them. And so when I went through that, it was extremely draining. In some respects, I would come home just wiped out or crying and feeling, why couldn't I come into their lives sooner? But I'm glad that I did at the time that I did. But I learned so much about humanity's, a human being's ability to survive through resilience. That you can be at your lowest low, and one of the addicts that I interviewed was this close to death. Moments from death. And somehow he woke up, and with cranial bleeding. He had fallen through a thick glass table, and his head broke through it. Yeah, he was on every imaginable drug. And at that moment in time, a note fell out of a Bible that his mother had given him, and he picked up the note. I mean, the timing was just out of this world, extraordinary. He picked up the note, and his mother said, "All I want is for you to someday be happy." And he said that was it. Those words right then, helped him survive.
Wow.
And I learned so much about people, but the common factor in every one of these trauma survivors was somewhere along the road of their life, the trek that they were traversing, they experienced something that made them feel that they didn't have value, so that they put themselves up against these situations, and they couldn't extricate themselves. One of the women that I speak to frequently, her husband used to hit her with an 11.5 pound of potatoes on a daily basis, and she'd just take it. She said, I'm ugly, I'm overweight, this is all I'm ever going to have. I mean, it's painful to hear that. It really gives people perspective, about what is important in life. When you hear a story like that, it's mind-boggling of how little people can feel, how low people can feel about themselves, and they're willing to put up with that kind of abuse and stay with it. But one day she woke up and she said, "This is it. I black and blue." She took her son and moved out, never looked back. But I learned the biggest lesson I learned is a person's ability for resilience. That we have the capacity, whether you believe in a God or Buddha or anything, we have that spiritual depth and that soul voice within us that says, "I want to survive." We have an instinct to survive, and so anyone can climb that mountain and get over it if they have that, if they listen to their soul.
We're in unprecedented times in human history right now, and there's a lot of people in this world that are hurting for a lot of different reasons. A lot of people are scared of starting that journey of self-worth and healing because it's painful and they've got to go through a lot. What are your pieces of advice to people that are really wanting to make a change in their life but just don't know how to get started?
And during this period, as I mentioned to you before we got on the air, on the show, during this period of time, people have had a lot of time by themselves or with their family, stillness. And whereas before we were going to appointments and meetings and, here and there and everywhere, so that you could ignore your feelings of low sense of self, lack of belief in yourself. The world is busy enough that you could. But now that we have a stillness, I call it a productive pause. And I've told people all over the world that use this time to dig down deep. And even though it's frightening for a lot of people, and people choose either to do it or not do it, and it's very, as you said, it's painful and it's difficult, but it's life-changing. And I'll never forget someone asking me at a book talk that I had, a book event, "Oh, well, you make it sound in your book as though you gain self-worth and then the world is a bowl of cherries," or something like that. And I said, "No, I think you didn't understand the meaning behind my words, is that when you do gain self-love, self-acceptance, self-trust, you can ride those difficult waves, those tsunamis, as you mentioned, and you know that you will get to the other side. You don't need the external affirmation. You don't worry about what people say about you that's negative or critical, because you have the internal strength to know that you can power through it." And I use the analogy, become your own best friend. That's sometimes for people, that's the first step they have to take, is I want to be my friend. Because people have a hard time realizing, how do I value myself? What does that even mean? What does that look like?
Yeah.
Of course I value, I'm a good cook, or again, that's not who you are. That's what you do. That's self-esteem. Is what you feel in your true core self. And a great way to begin is to say, how would I treat my closest friend or my child or someone I loved so unconditionally, my pet, my dog? That's the way I need to begin treating myself. That's an easy way to jumpstart the journey into, self-discovery, self-understanding, all those things. And be aware of your thinking. So people right now who are suffering terribly from panic, fear, uncertainty, there's so much volatility in our world and in the U.S. that the greatest gift they can give themselves right now is to tune into how they feel and reflect on what is working, what is not working in their life. And so moving forward as we continue to face this terrible virus and this huge paradigm shift in the way we, behave in our lives, we've got to learn to be nimble and flexible and feel good about every step that we take. And even if we err, it's okay. We're going to get up and move forward. So one of the things I've said to people is, when you accept yourself without condition, you realize that when you err, make a mistake, you may not be happy for a while, but it's human to err, but it's superhuman to believe in yourself even after you've made that mistake.
Yeah, beautiful.
That's really the goal.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Yeah. Wonderful stuff. I'd like to throw in two words beginning with the letter A if I can, because I think they're also vital and part of this journey that you're describing. One is authenticity. Getting as close to your true self is where you find a lot of the self-worth existing. And a lot of people, and this is one of the issues we find in the corporate world, is that people aren't their true selves. They're playing a game, they're putting on a mask, they're acting a lot of the time, they're playing the political sphere, and they don't show that authenticity. The other one is acknowledgement. I love what you said before in terms of when that person confronted you about, making everything sound as though the world's full of roses. The fact is that depending on how you look at the world, acknowledging that at times there will be challenges, there will be things that make you feel uncomfortable. And I think that acknowledgement of those things is very important, not trying to deny those things that are happening around you. Like, we can't go through the world at the moment thinking there's no COVID virus, it's not affecting us in any way. Let's acknowledge it. But then let's move on and look at, okay, well, it's presenting us with some opportunities, and you've just outlined some of those. It's a great time for people to hit the reset button. And let's face it, the reset button's also happening in our environment around us. Look what's happening to nature right now, because the human beings have turned off the factories and the machines, and we're not driving as much. So there's a beautiful reset going on right now, and I think it's a great opportunity. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Anne, about this change into self-worth and becoming more confident in self-worth, do you think that everything lies within, or do you think there are catalysts externally, such as somebody else, a friend, a family member helping you, or even an epiphany coming along, like a Bible falling off a table and having a note from your mother? What do you think of that? Is it always internal where the work has to be done, or can somebody else help you?
I think it's an amalgamation of both, but it's the issue it comes down to is it's up to you to take that step forward. Intentional change and sustainable change cannot be forced. You can't be guilted into it. The biggest mistake people make is doing something because they think they should or they need to, or their partner says you need to get in shape or you need to do this or do that. Those changes will never be sustainable because they emanate from outside of you versus inside of you. So something in your life that you collide with or that you come to the intersection with that prompts you to think, wow, it kind of causes you to, it's a marker in your road that says, stop. Something is not right. Something doesn't feel right. I'm taking this, I'm being mistreated by this person, or my boss is so rude to me and, irreverent, but I've been taking it all along. And then something hits you, and there is that in life that triggers you to say, and I had that experience in my job. My closest confidant, who was another architect, I came in late from dropping off my child at school, taking him to a doctor. He was ill. And he yelled at me when I walked in the door. He was so rude to me. And we were very close. We were close friends, close colleagues. And I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm out of here. I gave my 2 weeks notice, and my big boss, he's trying to drag me back in. But so that for me was the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
But the unearthing that root issue within me is something that I had to go and deal with myself. People can help you. Therapists help, support groups, there are programs, mentorship situations where people can kind of give you some guidance. Addicts often adhere to the 12-step program, and that helps them get through it. But you still wake up and go to bed with your soul self. You still have to figure out when you awaken in the morning and you're aggravated or frustrated or don't want to get out of bed, what is that signaling to me? You have to listen to your own, what I call soul self, your voice, because there's so much noise out there. People telling you this and that, and you feeling this way and that way and reacting, that at some point you've got to stop and say, I'm the leader of my life. I'm the conductor of my brain. If I want to feel some sense of fulfillment, let alone holistic health, I need to make these instrumental, lasting changes for myself. Otherwise, I'm going to be chasing something constantly for the rest of my life and reacting and responding to what people think of me.
Let's talk about those influences that are out there, because that's a very big issue. And somebody like yourself, who's had a large degree of experience in the marketing world, would have been one of those people out there promoting all sorts of products and services. We see it today in social media. We see the proliferation of, body images and what people need to do to be successful. What role does social media play in reducing our self-worth, do you think? Or does it play a role in reducing our self-worth?
Absolutely. It has a huge role. In fact, I saw a huge paradigm shift in so many things, in bullying, surge in bullying, surge in suicides, all sorts of aberrant behavior, because the social media was propagating this superficial behavior that we see every day by these people who are, portraying themselves as being perfect, even though I don't believe in the word and I don't use that word. I don't think it exists. But it makes other people, some of the people I've talked to, especially younger girls, are literally, they are starved for attention and affirmation, because they see all these people with all these followers and how successful and happy and, all this stuff. And it's so shallow, but it has really done a disservice, and it's injured millions of people in the world. I mean, you hear even Ed Sheeran was talking about a couple of years ago how he had to switch off of social media because he was getting so many bad, angry messages. I mean, no one is sacrosanct from the stuff that you say behind, the social media. So I do, as much as it's a wonderful tool for communicating, and, now especially through Zoom and Skype and FaceTime, you don't have to meet in person as much. But the use of social media to deride other people has become so rampant in our society. And I did a piece on Headline News recently about this boy in Australia who was being badly bullied. And he was only 8 or 9 years old. And he had tried to commit suicide several times because what people were saying to him. It was never this bad. I mean, bullies have always existed, but now people have a pulpit, an invisible pulpit by which they can, scorn on other people and get away with it. So I believe one of my missions is to try to impact that genre, to see what we can do to stop promoting these people who look a certain way and be a certain way, and start promoting more genuine, authentic communication that's based on thought, not looks, and those kinds of things.
What do you think around the people that say balance? Everything needs to have balance in our society. Social media does bring some good in some areas, and it brings a lot of bad and harm in a lot of areas. So how do we balance that out in life, where we don't, become the thought police and take away everything from everybody to go a certain way? What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I've been asked that question before, and before I answer that, I will say one of the books that I started to write in my 30s was don't focus on balance, focus on equanimity and centeredness, because we're never in our lives in a position to section out, equal amounts of time and equal amounts of focus to things. And it makes a lot of people crazy. I can't find balance. I'm going crazy. I'm here, especially now with COVID. My kids are running in and out, and I have no structured time. And so juggling balls in the air is my philosophy. But I do think that this obsession with social media somehow has got to change. And I think it starts with parents talking to their children and, educating them about the harmful effects of social media and how to perhaps separate from it for periods of time, for longer periods of time. Because right now, I can't talk to some people, including some of my kids sometimes, without them checking their phone. And not only is it distracting, but their brain has become this, recipient of constant information. And that impedes one's ability to focus.
Yep.
So constantly changing your attention to something new, how do you get anything done?
So what role do you think the owners of these platforms have to play in this? Because we're talking about, at times there's, been seen to be benefits of having social media, particularly for people that are disconnected across the world, maybe families who are keeping up to date with each other's lives via those platforms. But we've seen of recent times how powerful these social media platforms have become, and their intrusion into political world, into all sorts of different things. How do we, the minnows, take on these big, huge corporate giants? Is it a case of just saying to people, stop using the platforms? Is it as easy as that, or is there another way of doing it, do you think?
I think it's going to have to be an issue where there are lobbies and there's a movement towards that. I think that, of course, anybody that takes a step in a positive direction is going to affect energetic, positive change. I mean, I always feel, well, who am I to, tell people that they need to develop self-worth? But I feel that, especially now with the Black Lives Matter movement, educate people, share that with them, that people who are not happy with themselves are the ones that are the bigots and the racists. And people who are confident and comfortable within themselves are not going to do that. But in terms of affecting the industry as a whole, it's become this mammoth monopoly. And it's going to take a lot of people and a lot of political and people at the top. Like, I think Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, he's got a fairly good grip. He's been in a lot of controversial discussions, both in Washington and then on the side. But I do think it's going to take some mandate of some sort to restrict. And the problem we have in the U.S. especially is freedom of speech. Say and do it. But the other problem is that people aren't equipped to process that stuff, the harshness, the mean comments. They're not. So yeah, you can say anything, but you might be saying something to someone who ends up, killing themselves over it because they're not equipped to deal with it. So I think we've got to somehow do something bigger and more manageable so that we can get a hold of this, because social media has contributed to suicides and bullying, drug abuse, alcohol addiction, and of course now with COVID, the use of social media has exponentially grown. I mean, before it was big, but now it's just it's the constant sporting event for people.
Yeah, absolutely. What makes me really sad is when I look at these YouTubers and they're doing videos on things like, I spent 30 days off social media and this is how it affected me. I go back to my childhood and there was no social media and there was no internet, and to think that people these days put out a video to praise themselves for spending 30 days only off social media, it's very sad, isn't it, that we've got to that stage?
It's an addiction for people.
Yeah.
And, it's like doing crack cocaine. The more you do, the more you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It is shallow. I hate to use the word shallow again. I'm sorry, but that is one thing I gravitate away from, because that's a part of our society that just really, it tarnishes so many people, and yet it's so shallow and unimportant in the grand scale of your life.
Yeah.
Macroscopic look at your life.
Yeah.
What people say and do and how they act should not be changing the way you feel about yourself. It just should, but it does.
Let me make a segue into a much more positive part of the conversation. Your book, The Human Mosaic. What if all my listeners are going to pick it up and read it now? What are they going to take away? What's going to be the takeaway for them from reading your book from cover to cover? Anne?
Well, first of all, I will, if you don't mind, correct you. It's a human mosaic.
Yes, sorry, a human mosaic.
Reason I called it a instead of the is because every one of us is different, and there's no blanket formula. I can't hand you a recipe or a prescription to say, Mark, if you do these 5 things within 3 months, you'll start to change. You'll start to love yourself more. You'll start to believe in yourself. You'll be on that path to healing. So a human mosaic is indicative of the fact that everyone's life is different, but there are reasons to feel that you matter, that you're important, that your life has meaning. I mean, the chances of even being born are so rare. You know, if your parents had waited 1 minute or something, you wouldn't be here. And so it's teaching people to value their life. My book is really what's been called as a foundational. So learning how you develop your self-worth. People aren't born with low or high self-worth. So it starts in all those journeys, how to develop self-trust, which is really the fundamental tenet of self-worth. If you don't trust yourself, it's very difficult to trust others. So what I would say about my book is that it does ask a lot of the reader, and I've had a lot of feedback from people that they start to work on themselves and they lose their way. And I say, you've got to have the focus and the passion and the perseverance. The more you practice, the more you do, the greater your brain wants to change. Allow your brain to make those changes so you can live a healthier and happier life. And so stick to it. And it's it's written in shorter chapters. My editor did that for me because mine went on forever. So they're bite-sized sections. But for goodness sake, if you don't take the lead in your own life, you're apt to be at anyone's mercy at any time of day. If the weather's bad, you feel bad. If someone yells at you, you feel bad about yourself. Take the lead in your own life and make the commitment. And your brain wants to change. That's the key. It wants to create new neural pathways. It's not happy in this negative bias where you recycle negative information. So get up there. Now is the perfect time or the right time to really start working on yourself, because the world is changing and it's never going to be the way it was. Agree.
There's no time like the present. Now, for everybody watching and listening in today, I'm going to be putting all the details on how you can get a copy of Anne's book on the show notes today, and also to get in contact with Anne, because I'm sure she's inspired you all to start thinking about things, and you might want to reach out to her and ask some questions about going a bit deeper. And my last question for today is, this amazing journey that you've been on since you left the corporate world, what's it taught you about yourself?
I don't think I can answer that in one sentence, but...
you can have 2 then.
Okay. It has taught me that, one, if I want to accomplish something, there are barriers. I can find barriers any single moment of any day. Instead, I choose to jump over or even jump beyond those barriers and, pursue, have a vision and a dream. If you believe it, you will achieve it. And so I had so much doubt. I thought, writing a book, even my brother said to me, who writes a book, for goodness sake? It's taught me more about myself from the standpoint of perseverance and knowing that I want to make a difference. And with that passion, anyone can accomplish anything they set their mind to.
Fantastic. What a great way to end the show today, Anne. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Global Business Podcast. And I tell you what, I'm going to extend an invitation for you already to come onto my travel show, because I would like to have a chat to you about all your worldly travel. We can talk about Brussels and France and all these other wonderful places that you've been to. So if you'd like to accept that invitation sometime, you'd be more than welcome to come back.
I would absolutely love to, because I just came back from Cape Town in March.
Oh.
So I have a lot of stories to tell you about lockdown and Shamwari, where I wanted to be locked down. So yes, I've got a lot to share with you.
Well, that's great, because
Shamwari, get a chance.
I've got stories about Clifton and Camps Bay and all sorts of places there, so we can share those. Thank you very much for coming on my show today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for sharing with us all the world of self-worth, because it's something that's very, very important to everybody today. And out there, you listeners, I hope you got tremendous stuff out of that from Anne today as much as I did. And Anne, we'll see you again in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much. It was great speaking with you, Mark. I really appreciated the time.